for coming to listen to us today. So as Jade said, myself and Brian, we work for an organisation called Money and Pensions Service. That's an arm's length body of the Department for Work and Pensions. And our customer-facing brand is MoneyHelper. And myself and Brian are both pensions experts, technical specialists. We've worked in sort of pensions arena for a long time. I've done pensions administration. Brian was a financial advisor for many years. And now we spend our time speaking to people about the pensions and giving impartial guidance about that. Just to let you know, if you want to put questions in the chat box as we go along, please do feel free to do that. We may or may not be able to answer those during the session, but we can come to them at the end, or you can sort of put your hand up and ask questions at the end. As Jade mentioned, there will be a recording of the session that you can access later, and we'll also send a PDF copy of the slides so that you can click on the links in the slides. So Jade will send all those out to you. You don't need to put your email address in the chat box or anything like that. So who are MoneyHelper then? So it's not necessarily a particularly well-known brand, but we are a service, as I say, provided by the government in order to give impartial guidance to people about all kinds of financial matters. So whereas myself and Brian are specifically on the pension side of things, MoneyHelper actually covers a wide range of financial sort of queries and guidance. So debts, mortgages, redundancy, making a will, saving, ISAs, all kinds of things. And the link to our website is there on the slide, moneyhelper.org.uk. And I think one of the best things about our website is that it's a safe environment for you to look at. So we're not going to be trying to sell you anything. We're not going to be trying to get your personal data. All the links on there are safe. There's going to be no adverts, no clickbait or anything like that. So you can look around in the security that you're not going to get scammed, or you're not going to pass your details on to someone that you didn't want to pass them on to. We provide impartial guidance rather than financial advice. So what we can do is give you options, tell you what you can do with your money, and talk to you, act maybe as a sounding board for your decision making. What we can't do is tell you what you should do. We can't tell you which particular pension product to choose, for example. So for that, you would need regulated financial advice. We do have information about financial advisors on our website, and we also have a list of regulated advisors that are authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority to give that advice. So again, a safe list of advisors that you can go to. If you needed legal advice, then we'd suggest the Law Society website, where they also have a list of suitable people to speak to. So what we're going to talk about today, we realise that the people in this session come from a variety of different pension schemes, so we can't cover the fine details of each of those particular pension schemes without it getting too much details, but we'll look generally about planning for retirement, how much you might need in retirement, how pensions work, the different types of private pensions, and an overview of defined benefit pensions, which include public sector ones like the NHS, and defined contribution pensions, which includes personal pensions and other sort of non-public sector workplace pensions, a little bit about women and pensions, how to save more into pensions, and some other details such as what death benefits might be payable, how you might find and combine your old pensions, pension scams, some things to do over the coming weeks or months, perhaps some next steps, and how you can contact us. So I'll hand over to Brian now to discuss about the planning for retirement and the state pension.
That's lovely. Thanks very much, Kath. And just so you know, Kath, some really good numbers attending. We're up to 116 already. So thank you, everyone, for making the effort to come along. As Kath mentioned, for my sort of previous career, I've been with the Money and Pension Service for sort of nearly 5 years, but I was 25 years or more as an independent financial advisor. And when you first start as a financial advisor, what often happens is they give you clients who are of a similar age to you. And then, you know, if you do a good job for them, they stay with you right the way through your career. And so I was in my sort of early to mid 20s when I first started giving people financial advice. And one of the questions that very regularly came up, or a statement really, was when I said to sort of clients about, thinking about the long term and thinking the future and about retirement, they would say, oh, that's so far off. It's a bit early, isn't it, Brian, to start planning for retirement? And it was quite interesting, actually, because those same people were still with me when I was in my 50s and late 50s. And it's interesting how many of them said, oh, Brian, I'm now 55. Is it a bit too late to start planning for retirement? So a couple of things there. Obviously, not everybody listened to me. And secondly, the answer to the questions on both occasions is no and no. The right time to start planning for retirement is as soon as you're ready to and feel motivated to. But it's a very, very long-term thing. And before Kath puts the next slide up, one of the things to be aware of is that, you guys and girls in the NHS are probably aware of this. Your service is working. And over the last 120 years, the average life expectancy has gone up by roughly 2.5 years every decade. And so people are, on average, living much longer than they used to. And I know we will all know of friends and family who we've lost younger than that, but on average, someone in average health reaching their 60s is likely to be in retirement for 20 to 30 years. And the reason that's relevant is that's a long time to be alive when you are no longer receiving a salary. So if we have the next slide, please, Kath. It's very, very difficult to know how much is enough. We're always busy working, we're dealing with paying today's bills, and how do we think of the future and how much am I actually going to need? Is my state pension and my NHS pension going to be enough for me, or am I going to have to carry on working way beyond I thought I would, or in fact, is it all fine and I can retire on time? And so every individual is different. We've all got different habits, different hobbies, different outgoings, different expenses, different commitments. But what we thought we'd have a look is to share with you a really major piece of research done into what people who've already retired are living on and what kind of standard of living those people have got. And it was commissioned by an organisation called the PLSA, which stands for the Pension and Long-Term Savings Association. And they used research experts from Loughborough University, and they went out and interviewed roughly 2,500 people. Roughly half of them were single and the other half were in couples. And they said, tell us what you do in retirement, tell us how much you've got to live on, and tell us what life looks like. What are you able to do? What financial concerns do you have? How do you feel about being in retirement on this income? And what they did was they grouped the answers into 3 standards of living. A minimum standard of living, which basically enables you to pay all your bills, have enough money for food, meet all your regular commitments, and maybe go out once a week to see your friends and family. So you could just about get by, but it's hardly something to look forward to after 30, 40 years of having your head to the grindstone. And also, if something goes wrong, these people were always worried, well, what if the car blows up? What if the boiler goes wrong and it's not insured? They were able to cope on a day-to-day basis, but they didn't necessarily have freedom of mind to feel like they were financially safe. They then looked at a category of pensioner who has what we would call a moderate standard of living. And that basically enables people to meet all of their day-to-day expenses, possibly spend a bit more on the grocery bill, buying slightly nicer food, probably run a second-hand car, probably go on holiday to Europe once a year, and to an extent have a little bit of cushion, have a little bit of flexibility. So if something does go wrong, you have got something to fall back on. So these people weren't always worrying about where their next penny was coming from, but neither were they super wealthy. They were able to enjoy their retirement without necessarily doing anything too exciting. And then we looked at the maximum standard of living, and this is where people have far more financial freedom, can probably replace their car every 1 or 2 years, go on 2 or 3 foreign holidays, indulge their sort of hobbies and pastimes, and be able to do a lot more without thinking about it. And just to help you, these are only guides, but these figures were originally published. The research was done in late 2017. The figures were published in 2018, and they've been updated to cope with inflation up until October last year. And as I think all of us know, you perhaps therefore need to add a little bit on top of that, because in the last year, inflation's been round about 10%. So somebody to meet their basic standard of living, a single person on average will need probably somewhere just under 12,000 now, if you had 10% of those figures. Someone with a moderate standard of living, round about 22,500, 23,000. And someone who wants that extra financial freedom and to have the luxuries might need roughly 35, 36,000. Couple of things to point out. You'll see that people in London and the southeast probably need more money to have the same standard of living as you up in sunny Yorkshire. And also to note that it's not twice as expensive for couples to pay their bills and have fun as a single person, because so many things can be shared. You know, electricity can be shared between people. Food isn't always twice as expensive if you cook a meal for two people. If you want to have a little bit more at that, there's some really interesting research that gives you more background behind, well, what do these numbers mean and what does retirement look like on the website retirementlivingstandards.org.uk. And if you do request after the meeting a copy of the slides, all of these links will work when we send the PDF version out to Jade. The other thing to be aware of is it's not just about what other people do. At the bottom of the previous slide, no need to go back, but at the bottom of the previous slide, there's also links on our website. There's some useful budget tools to help you work out what you're spending now and what you might need in retirement. And there's also some really good calculators to help you work out, well, what's my current pension planning going to get me? Sorry, Kath, next slide. So the first thing people often worry about is, oh, there won't be a state pension, will there? It's extremes. Some people think there won't be a state pension when I get there. And some people think, oh, I don't need to worry about retiring and my state pension will be enough. Well, we can't say for certain the state pension will be there, but it has been there since 1908. And what you will have seen, however, is that gradually the retirement age is gradually being pushed back to reflect the fact that we're living longer. And under the new rules that came out since 2016, for those of you who are sort of my age rather than Kath's age, there's some transitional protection. But for most people under 50, the full state pension, if you were 66, 67 or 68 today, depending on your age, is £185.15 a week. And that's about £800 a week. So if you, sorry, £800 a month, not a week, £800 a month, chance to be a fine thing. So £800 a month, and don't go back to the previous slide, Kath, but just to remind people, the minimum standard of living is closer to £1,000 a month. So the state pension will go a long way to giving you what you need to survive, but it's possibly for many people not going to give you that in retirement you were looking forward to. And in order to get the state pension, you need to do two things. You need to live until your state pension age, but in your adult life, you need to have made national insurance contributions or got national insurance credits. So if you're working full-time or self-employed full-time or on certain benefits or bringing up children under 12 and getting child benefit, you may well be getting a credit. And you need at least 35 years where you're getting paid contributions or credits to build up that state pension. So a couple of things you might want to be aware of. If you want to check what age do I retire at, have a look at that top link. It's gradually going up. So the younger you are, the older it is before you can claim your state pension. And if you want to see how well you're doing on your journey towards getting the full 35 years, you can set up something called a gateway account and get a state pension forecast online. And that will help give you an early warning system if you aren't quite going to get the full state pension by the time you get there. And for those who aren't, it may be possible to make voluntary contributions to make sure that you do. So remember that figure, round about £800 a month if you want to live on the state pension. Next slide, please, Kath. So in a way, the previous slide telling you about the state pension, it kind of explains why it's important to look after your private pensions. And the whole reason that pensions came along all those years ago when they were set up is because it was recognized that the state pension is there as a sort of a welfare amount to enable us to get by and survive. But there's an acknowledgement that if you want to perhaps have more choices and less financial worries, the idea here behind both occupational and private pensions is it gives you a chance to pay into that and invest in those pensions so that you've got more choices when you do get to retirement. And when we say private pension, we do include all of the NHS pensions that are available to you. They're occupational, but we still regard them as private. And whether you're paying into a pot of money or whether you're paying into the Career Average Revalued 2015 scheme or similar defined benefit schemes, basically the cost of your contributions is actually lower than it might appear. Basically, you receive tax relief on the money that you pay into a pension. And as a result, you pay the net contribution and the tax relief is redirected to help fund your own contributions. And of course, with all of the schemes that we're talking about today, they're all different, but all of them offer tax relief and all of them mean that your employer will also pay into your pension pot. And Kath and I are not blind to the cost of living crisis. I mean, we're living it too, and we fully understand how difficult it can be to think of the future when gas bills are going up, food inflation, petrol, running of cars, it's all going up. And so in a way, it's very challenging to stay in a pension scheme when you've got all these immediate pressures. And we can't advise you what to do, but what we're trying to sort of shine a light on is just how much your pension could help you later on if you're able to stay in it. When you get to the point where you take your retirement, there's a general rule that you can take roughly a quarter of the value of your pension as a tax-free lump sum and have a smaller income when you retire, or you can take less tax-free cash and have a bigger income. And the thing is, whilst your money is actually invested in pensions, as well as getting help from the government and your employer, the actual growth that your pension enjoys is all largely free of any taxes. So that's a bit about pensions generally. Next slide, please, Kath. So I know that Kath and I are talking to you all today, and some of you belong to a variety of different pension schemes. And there are basically two types. So those of you who are in the NHS, the Retirement Builder Plan or the University Superannuation Scheme Income Builder Plan are paying to a pension that is known as a defined benefit scheme. Those of you who are paying into the NEST scheme or the University Superannuation Scheme Investment Builder are paying into a defined contribution pension. And they've each got their pros and cons, but they're very different. So for those of you who are in NHS, RBB and USS Income Builder, you are paying into a pension where you do not have a pot. Instead, you're building up year on year a guaranteed income for life to last as long as you do when you retire. And so the idea of this kind of scheme is you don't have a pot of money. Instead, you've got a promise to pay you a regular pension income, however long you live, with the option, if you want to take a smaller income, to have a separate tax-free lump sum. So that could give you money to perhaps buy a nice car, go on a nice holiday, do up the house. And the regular income is so you can stay living it and carry on feeding and heating yourself. Now, all of these schemes that you belong to have changed over the last 20 or 30 years. So for those of you who have been in this employment for 20, 30 years, you may be in different sections of the scheme, but they all share those common functions that basically you're getting a regular income for the rest of your life with the option of a lump sum. Now, there are some of you who, if you were employed before 2006, may be able to go earlier, but the general idea is that most of these schemes pay out without reduction between age 60 up to state pension age, but that if you want to, you can opt to take those pensions earlier. And at the moment, the legislation allows you to take it as young as 55. But of course, if you take it earlier, for every year you take it earlier, you're getting it for a year longer than was planned. And so that income will be reduced. There's loads more information on the pension benefit here, word on the slide, if you want to have a read. Now, there's also a very large number of you who will be paying into the defined contribution pension. That's what DC stands for. And just to remind you, that will be those of you who are in the NEST scheme or the University Superannuation Scheme Investment Builder Scheme. And what you're doing here is you're actually building up a pot of money by you, the tax people, and your employer paying contributions into either Nest or the investment builder plan. And that money is then invested in a variety of funds. So you're not building up a guaranteed pot there, you're building up a pot where the amount you get will be determined by how young you are when you pay contributions, how much you pay in, and how well or how badly those investments perform for you. And what the idea is here is that you can build up this pot, and when you come to take your benefits, as a general rule of thumb, you can take a quarter or 25% of that pot as an entirely tax-free lump sum. And then, unlike the defined benefit scheme, which kind of tells you you're getting a regular income, with this kind of pot, although you don't have any guarantees, there's a far wider range of options for how you use the remaining pot to tide you over for the rest of your life. And there's loads of information on defined contributions generally on the link on the slide, which will work. You may have noticed those eagle eye of you that up to age 55 has got an asterisk on. And that's because we are all living longer. And as a result, the national minimum pension age, which is the earliest you can take your pension, in 2028 is going up to age 57 rather than 55. And it may well increase in future. So that's a bit of background. Let's have a little bit more of a look at those defined benefit schemes. And just to remind you, in principle, it's giving you a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. And as a result, as you can see in the speech bubble on the right-hand side, there is no individual pot with a defined benefit scheme, no capital value of that money that is actually yours to have. Instead, it's a promise of a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. And there are some similarities with a defined contribution. You still have to pay in a percentage of your salary as a contribution towards it, but the true cost of those monthly contributions is reduced depending on your tax rate. So for those of you who are basic rate taxpayers, the true cost of £100 a month contribution is £80. If you're fortunate enough to be a higher rate taxpayer, the true cost is £60 because 40% tax relief is given. And if you're on a very high income, then actually the true cost is £55 because you get £45 tax relief. That's the cost of paying in. The cost of paying in is actually completely unrelated to what you get because it's a defined benefit. So with a defined benefit scheme, it's actually defined in the scheme rules how much a year for the rest of your life you'll get at scheme retirement age. And the rate that it's built up, just to help explain that to you, you may have heard the term accrual rate. That's just the amount by which it builds up. So certain schemes you may have heard in the past 80ths or 60ths or 54ths or 57ths. That's just the number that you divide your salary by each year to work out how much each year you're increasing your pension by. Your employer also guarantees to pay the pension you've built up at your normal retirement date. And if there isn't enough money in the fund to pay that pension, your employer has to pay it. So there is no risk to you of, will my pension be able to be paid? Yes, it will. And if it's not affordable, your employer will have to pay a special contribution so that you still get your guaranteed income. And usually that income goes up with some measure of inflation each year to help protect you against inflation. If you want to keep up to date, each year you get something called a total reward statement. And we're quite happy to take questions about that afterwards about what's on it. But the idea is each year it tells you when you get to normal retirement age, this is how much a year you'll get as a pension for the rest of your life. And it also gives you alternative figures. This is the smaller pension you get if you want to take this maximum tax-free lump sum. And it's a really good idea just to keep abreast if you're interested in trying to plan for your future. Next slide, please, Kath. So when you come to take the pension, that's the thing. You know, why do I carry on struggling to pay my bills today and paying in all this money to the pension? And the answer might be because I don't want to struggle like this when I retire. And usually when you take your pension, you can usually start taking it as early as 55 up to age 75. but there will be a normal retirement scheme for each scheme that you belong to. The current pension age, for example, for the NHS one, for the new career average scheme, is your personal state pension age. Others, if you joined the NHS many years ago, might be as early as 60 as an all retirement date, or 65. And similarly with the USS, the University Superannuation Scheme, that's changed as well. You can choose how much of that income you want to give up to a limit in order to generate a tax-free lump sum. The key thing is you cannot separate taking the tax-free cash from taking the income. So if you want to take the tax-free cash from the scheme, you will also have to take the income at the same time. At the moment, there's 132 of us in the room, and there's 100% chance that all of us won't be here one day. If you're unlucky enough to die and your spouse is still alive, or a dependent is still alive, there is usually as well, with this kind of scheme, a defined benefit spouse's pension. And they also benefit from annual increases as well. And so with this scheme, you haven't got investment risks, you've got certainty, you haven't got flexibility, but you've got certainty that you'll get what you're going to get as long as you live, and your partner will be looked after if they live longer. Next slide, please. So whereas the previous type of pension is characterized by having no pot but guaranteed benefits, just not very flexible, let's now turn our hand to how do defined contribution schemes work. And they have no guarantees, and they're probably best characterized as being a flexible investment with lots of tax advantages. So let's have a look at them. So when you pay into a defined contribution pension scheme, just to remind you, that's the USS Investment Builder and Nest, it looks the same in your pay packet, because once again, you pay a percentage of your salary as a contribution. And once again, you get tax relief that reduces the true cost of paying for that pension. The amount your employer pays in is defined in your contract or scheme rules. And that's why it's called defined contribution. We do not know what you're actually going to end up with. It's just the contributions that are defined. So we know how much you're going to pay in, we know what the tax people are going to add, and we know what your employer is going to be add. That money each month is collected from your pay, and it's given to Nest and the Investment Builder, and that money is then invested for you. And that invested pot can't be guaranteed, because the purpose of investment is to try and grow your money. But in order to do that, you have to take an element of risk, particularly in the shorter term, that it could go down as well as up. And even if it only goes up, there's no knowing exactly how much it will go up. And so the amount you're going to get is not guaranteed, but what you're doing is you are building up an individual pot that you can then make decisions about yourself without having to ask the scheme, what can I do? And it is a pot of money. And the size that the size of the pot that you build up is determined by how much you pay in, how early you start paying in. Not leaving the scheme will obviously benefit you more than leaving the scheme, because there won't be any gaps. How well the money's invested for you, and what the charges are, and you get the balance. And each year you can get a statement, an annual statement, that will show you the up-to-date value of your pension pot on the day the statement was provided, and an estimate of what sort of income that might give you. So that's a bit about defined contribution. Next slide, please. So let's have a look for those of you in the USS Investment Builder and Nest. This does not apply for the defined benefit people in this room. This is for the Nest and Investment Builder. And what we're looking at is, well, shall I stay in the scheme, or shall I leave? And so what we're looking here is a typical NHS situation for defined contribution pensions, where the employer pays 5% of the salary and the employee pays 3%. So in the middle purple box, you'll see here we've taken an example of someone earning £24,000 a year, which is £2,000 a month. And the first thing you'll see is that £48 a month is not 3% of 2,000. £48 from you and £12 from the tax people is 3%. So the true cost to you of that contribution of 3% is £48, not 60. You'll also notice in the bottom of the middle box that the employer pension is £100, 5% of 2,000. So on the left-hand box, you can see that in that funnel that's filling up your sort of pension oil tank, if you like, there are 3 contributors. There's yourself, there's tax relief, and there's your employer. And on this example salary of 2,000 a month, therefore £160 is your monthly contribution. If you decide for understandable reasons, I just can't afford to be in this scheme anymore, the sad thing is that you won't get £160 extra in your take-home pay. You'll only get £48 because you won't receive the 5% employer pension contribution because you're not in it, and you won't get the £12 income tax relief because you'll pay it if it's take-home. So please be aware that if you look at those figures, it's something like 250% growth on your monthly contribution you're missing out on if you leave the scheme. And that's every single month you're not in the scheme. And Kath and I are not daft. We understand that there's a lot of pressure, but be aware that the amount that you are saving by leaving the scheme is quite a bit less than the amount you're building up to help you for the rest of your life, when you will still often have a lot of those bills. So it's a very big decision. You can rejoin the scheme later, but please be aware of the negative long-term consequences compared to the short-term benefit of leaving the scheme. Next slide, please. So when you come to take a pension, I mentioned earlier that if you've got this pot, so again, these choices are not available with a guaranteed defined benefit pension. These are for the pots of money for those of you in Nest and the Investment Builder. And so when you come to stop working, there are 6 possible ways you could make use of that pot. For a very rare few of us, I'm not one of them, when you stop work, you might not immediately need to dip into your pension pot. You might have other savings. You might have a different saving plan that's matured, and you're going to use that. So the first thing to be aware of, if you want to, you can retire, but leave your Nest and Investment Builder pensions invested. And the benefit of that could be it builds up to a higher figure. And of course, the older you are before you start taking it, the more you can take each year. But for most people, it's, tell me, Brian, I've saved all my life. I've sacrificed various things in the short term. How can I make use of this pension? Well, the first thing to do is to be aware that if you so wish, you can take up to 25% of the pot as a tax-free lump sum with any of the remaining options available. Okay, and that's an option. If you want to have a guaranteed regular income, a lot of people like to budget and they like to know what they've got each month. So if you want that option, what you can do is you can take up to 25% of your pot as a tax-free lump sum in your bank, do what you want with it, holidays, cars, home improvements, helping the children, etc. But then you can buy a guaranteed income for life, something called an annuity. And what happens is you give the other 75% of your pot to an insurance company, and they will tell you based on your age, your health and interest rates, how much a year you'll get for the rest of your life. And that's an option if you wish. The other options are where you don't give the rest of the money to an insurance company. You leave the money invested under your own control. So there's no longer any guarantees. And when you take investment risk, it could be that if the remaining money is invested and does well, you could get a bigger amount each year than a guaranteed income. But of course, if investments do badly or the cost of living goes up, you might find you can take less each year. But you can get the choice to take 25 of the hold pot all up front, leave the rest in a pot called drawdown and draw it off each month. You can slice your pensions up into a series of mini pensions. And each time you take a lump sum, 25% of that lump sum only is tax-free. The other 75% is taxable. So you're spreading out your tax-free cash. If you're feeling very hungry, you can take the whole pension pie all in one go. 25% of it will be tax-free. The other 75% will be taxable. Just be aware, if you've built up a very big pot, you could build up a very big tax bill because you're taking it all in one year, or you can mix those options around. So there's lots and lots of options available. The key thing is, how big is my pie going to be? Next slide, or I'm not sure if it's me or you for the next one. I think it's over to you, Kath. Yep, I'll try and answer some of the questions in the chat box as we're going through.
Okie doke. So back to me to just cover some other aspects of pensions that's probably important for you to be aware of. So just start off with a bit of information about women and pensions. Obviously, people within the care sector and the NHS, there's a high proportion of females working in this area. So it's worth sort of being aware that women typically have about half the pension pot that a man has at retirement. And that's due to various different things. So firstly, that probably one of the most obvious ones is the gender pay gap, that women generally are still getting less money than our male counterparts. That gender pay gap is still 25% in women over 50. It's less than that for younger women. So if if you're having less of a salary, then you're going to be paying less pension contributions. You're going to be building up less pension generally. The other thing, of course, is that women may take career breaks more often, especially to have children. So although you do keep pension benefits during paid maternity leave, you wouldn't normally get pension benefits built up during unpaid maternity leave. And then, of course, after maternity leave or later on in life, then women will often work part-time, and 75% of part-time workers are women. And again, if you're getting less income, then you're going to be paying less into the pension. You're going to be building up less pension going forward. Women are also more likely to provide unpaid care. So again, another reason for part-time work or even leaving work early. Divorce will also increase the savings gap for pensions because women are likely to waive the right to the partner's pension. Often the key thing for the woman to think about is keeping hold of the marital home to bring children up and so on, not really thinking about the long-term future of, they're having to pay a lot of money into the upkeep of that house and maybe not being able to pay so much into a pension. So only 3% of people currently seek financial advice as part of that divorce, and that's expected to actually get worse under new divorce rules. So anyone that's going through a divorce, we can give some guidance on that. We have special appointments for people going through a divorce. Now, the other thing that's affecting women's pensions that's become more and more apparent over recent years is menopause. So about 400,000 women start menopause each year, and over 70% of them will feel that their performance at work is likely to be affected. And 25% of women experience severe or life-changing symptoms such that they consider giving up work as a result. So a huge amount of women have given up work. It's estimated to be about 1 million in recent years. So this is a huge issue both for the individual woman and also for the employer who's potentially leaving, potentially losing their most experienced staff at a point when really you'd hope that they might be at the peak of their careers in their 40s and 50s. So how can menopause affect your pension? Just a couple of things to think about. You might decide, well, I can't cope with this work anymore. It's too much for me. I'm exhausted. I'm not sleeping well. I can't concentrate so well. So you might think about taking early retirement or partial retirement. You might want to reduce your hours. You might want to change your role to something less physical or less stressful, less responsibility. You might just not apply for that promotion that you otherwise would have gone from. And you may move away from permanent work to do agency work, bank work, something like that, in order to give you more flexibility. So you're not having to work as long hours when you're not feeling so good. You may also change the type of work that you do completely, either becoming self-employed or working in the private sector instead of public sector, for example. All of these, options might be suitable for some people, but of course, if you are reducing your income through reducing hours, reducing your responsibility and so on, again, you're going to be paying less into that pension. If you take early retirement, that kind of has a double whammy effect on your pension because you are paying into the pension for less number of years, plus you're making that pension stretch out for longer. So it's really important for people, if you are thinking of changing your work pattern or leaving work, think about the long term as well as, can I afford to live for the next few years? Think about how you're affecting your pension for the rest of your life. And most of us will spend our lives sort of putting our head in the sand with pensions anyway and not thinking too much about it, maybe don't really understand how our pensions work, how much we're going to have. So if you're trying to make a decision about your long-term future, your career and your pension, when you have menopause symptoms, or if you've got other stresses such as caring responsibilities or ill health, then your decision might be affected by things like brain fog, anxiety, exhaustion, and just being consumed with other thoughts. So do take time to think about these things carefully. Give us a call at MoneyHelper, speak to people, speak to your GP, speak to your employer who may be able to put some reasonable adjustments in place rather than you making a permanent and long-term decision about your future. One of the things that everyone can do in order to improve their pension prospects, and something that women specifically can think about doing to prepare themselves for periods of being out of work or working part-time and so on, is paying more into a pension when you can afford to. And as Brian said, we're very much aware of the cost of living crisis at the moment, and it's very difficult to think about paying more for something that might not help you out for the next 20 years. But you can pay more into your workplace pension. You can do that either to build up more of the type of pension that you've got. So if you're in one of the defined benefit schemes like the local government pension scheme or the NHS, you can build up more of that type of pension. If you're in one of the defined contribution schemes like Nest, then you can build up a bigger pension pot. And if you're in the defined benefit schemes, you can build up an extra defined contribution pot on the side. So there's all kinds of different options, and you can ask your payroll team for more information about that, or go onto your pension scheme website and find out what your options are. You can also pay into a different pension, a personal type of pension, so it's separate from your workplace. And you would do that by setting up your own plan and paying in out of your bank account. Whichever of those options you take, paying more into your workplace pension or paying into a personal pension, you still get the tax relief up to certain limits. So for most of us, we can pay into a pension scheme up to £40,000 a year, or up to the level of our salary. So if you've got a salary of £30,000, you can make a personal contribution of £30,000 into a pension scheme. Obviously, realistically, most of us can't afford to do that. So in real terms, most of us can pay as much as we like into a pension scheme and get tax relief on those contributions. You can, of course, also build up other assets to help you in your retirement. So general savings, ISAs, property, and so on. And there's a link there for further information about choosing a personal pension and for other types of pension savings. So many of us will have had several jobs by the time we get to retirement age, and you may have paid into personal pensions in the past. So some schemes like the defined contribution ones, even if you're not paying to them anymore, they will normally write to you every year with a statement. But of course, if you've moved house, if you've not updated the pension company, you may have lost contact with them. And unfortunately, there isn't at the moment a website or a telephone service where you can simply provide your details and get a list of your pensions. Defined benefit schemes don't necessarily write to you every year at all. So again, you may have moved, lost contact with them. In a year or two's time, we hope there's going to be something available called the Pensions Dashboard, where you can put your national insurance number and other details in and get a list of your pensions, information about who's looking after them, how much they're worth, how much your state pension is. So we're maybe a year or two away from that, but it will be really helpful to people with their pension planning once we get there. What you can do in the meantime is use services like the government's pension tracing service, where you would put in information about your employer, put your employer's name in, and then that will give you the current pension administrator that's looking after that pension. And of course, you can contact us at MoneyHelper for help and guidance with this as well. It is important to be wary about who you give your information to. regarding pensions. So there are adverts online regarding paying in about tracing pensions, for example, and combining them. We can help you with that. We can help trace your pensions. Well, there's no company out there who has access to information that you or I don't already have access to. So you will still need to give them a list of your employers. You will still need to say, I think I might have had a pension with this company, and so on. Do be aware that this is a way for people to get your personal information, and they are obviously in it to make money one way or another. So even if they're a genuine company and they're not scammers, then you just need to be aware, why are these people doing this? How are they going to get money from me in the future? Are they going to have a charge for looking for this, or are they going to charge me for doing something in the future? So do be aware, you don't need to use any commercial companies. Please contact ourselves or the Pension Tracing Service for help with finding old pensions. When you do find them, do keep your pension providers up to date with your address. Registering for an online account is a good way of keeping up to date, and there is a link for the pension contact details. That's the pension tracing service that I mentioned. And also further down, there's a couple of links on our website about tracing lost pensions and also transferring pensions, to combine them together perhaps. So when we are thinking of combining pensions, it's a really common question: should I put all my pensions into one place? And this really comes back to, starting off with the different types of pensions and understanding what you have. So if we split them into defined benefit, to the sort of bluey colours at the top, and the defined contribution, the more pinky colours at the bottom, we have to look at those completely differently. So public sector pensions, like local government and like NHS, they can usually be transferred from one to another. And you would move your benefits from one scheme to another. And you can normally do that when you join another public sector scheme. Most private sector defined benefit schemes won't accept a transfer in, and you would need financial advice to transfer a defined benefit scheme that's worth a total of £30,000 in total to a defined contribution scheme. And that's because you're giving up those guarantees and giving yourself more flexible options, but with less guarantees. So really, it's vital that you work out what type of pension do you have. Is it a defined benefits pension? In which case, you're probably going to end up leaving that where it is, unless you have a particular reason for wanting to transfer it into a defined contribution scheme. You're not going to transfer those schemes just to, get all your ducks in a row and make things simpler for you in the future. And that might be what you do with defined contribution schemes. You might think, well, I've got a couple of thousand there, a few hundred there, 10,000 there. I want to put them all in one place so it's easier to keep track of. Some older defined contribution schemes will have special benefits or guarantees attached to them, and you may need financial advice to move those. So those are mainly personal pensions or workplace pensions from the 80s and 90s. Later pensions, they tend to be much more simple. So one of the first things you would need to do is check with your provider if there's anything special about your pension that you need to know about. But most of the modern defined contribution schemes and a lot of the older ones are simple pots of money that you can move around quite easily. So what might you want to think about when thinking about combining these simple defined contribution schemes? So speak to your pension provider. Is there anything special about my pension that I need to know about? Have I got a protected amount of tax-free cash? Have I got some kind of guarantee on it? Are there any charges if I transfer this? What are the regular charges that I'm paying on an annual or a monthly basis? And will you accept a transfer into this scheme? What might affect your decision making? So you might just want to have everything in one place. You might find that one pension companies difficult to deal with. You can't get hold of them on the phone. You might prefer to deal with them on an app. You might prefer not to deal with them on an app when you really want to speak to them on the phone. So it might be the ease of dealing with that company. It might be the range of investment choices that you have, and it might be the choices that you have for retirement, especially when you get towards retirement age. So few things that you might want to think about, but really understanding what you have to start off with is always the important first step. And again, if you need help with understanding any of your statements, please do contact us at MoneyHelper. I mentioned briefly before about pension scams. It is important to be aware of these. It is illegal for any company to contact you out of the blue about pensions. And so that involves, emails, texts, telephone calls, and so on. If someone contacts you out of the blue, they're acting illegally, so you don't want to speak to them at all. Either just ignore them or report them to the Information Commissioner's Office. As with any other scam, there are some certain red flags, such as applying pressure to make you make a quick decision. You've got to do this by the end of the week. If you don't do it by then, you'll lose out on this fantastic opportunity. Some kind of time-limited investment that, we can only offer this for the next week, or if you don't do it quickly, we'll run out of these investment opportunities. There might be some kind of inflated guarantees about investments. If you invest with us, we'll guarantee you this fantastic rate of investment return and no risks. Well, that's not going to happen. If there were funds out there where you could get guaranteed investment returns with no risk, everybody would be doing it. If there's talk of free pension reviews, legal loopholes, or government initiatives, these are also red flags regarding pension scamming. And as with any other scam, you need to be really careful, because if you do get scammed out of your pension or any other money, then you might not see any of it again. The Financial Conduct Authority has information on their website. There's a link there regarding pension scams. And again, as with any scams, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So whether it's an advert on Instagram, social media, a job offer through WhatsApp, someone's contacting you out of the blue offering something too good to be true, the chances are it's going to be a scam. So don't deal with it at all. So a few things that you might want to look into doing over the coming weeks or months. Tracing those lost pensions. Oh, sorry, handing over to Brian for this bit. Sorry, Brian,
no,
carrying
that's
on.
Right, I'll
regardless.
let you off. Yeah, I ought to go. Just apologies to someone, and also to Jane Bushell. I've answered a few of the questions. Instead of doing to everyone, I actually clicked on Jane. So before I do the next bit of the presentation, Emma Owen, the state pension's not means tested. As long as you have the necessary NI credits, you'll get the amount of state pension you paid for. And in addition, you will get your occupational and private pensions. Tracy Leak, yes, the final salary schemes are defined benefit, and so are the career average schemes. Kate York, you can set up an online access to your pension scheme that you belong to. I was asking you if you're in the NHS or Retirement Builder or USS Income Builder section, but you should be able to contact whichever scheme you belong to and set up online access to get an estimate of your pension. Sandra Hutchinson, if you die before you take your pensions, there are lump sum death benefits you can leave to your non-dependents. And if you have a defined contribution pension, you can leave a defined contribution pot to who you want when you die. But if you do die whilst in receipt, having retired of your defined benefit pension, you may indeed well lose the pension part of it if you have no spouse or dependent. And Nicola Miller, potentially you could use a will to leave your defined contribution pensions, but in practice it's quicker and easier to use death benefit nomination forms to let the scheme know who you want the beneficiaries to be. Kenneth Moore, you can take your defined contribution pensions as a series of lump sums or chunks, and if you do that, you can spread out the tax-free cash. So if you take a chunk of a defined contribution pension, you get 25% of that chunk tax-free, 75% taxable. But with defined benefit pensions, unless you take partial retirement, then you take your whole pension at the same time as you take your lump sum. And Phil Taylor, I think the last one that I sent to Jane instead of Phil. You must be learning a lot, Jane, today. Phil, the McLeod figures are not available until October 23. So all total reward statements currently are based on the actual scheme or schemes you actually belong to between April 2015 and March 22. And the total reward statement normally tells you both, Phil. It tells you what you've built up in each scheme so far, but the estimated pension assumes you work right the way through to state retirement age. And Lindsay, you can take both pensions at 55, but the 95 scheme will be reduced to reflect you're taking it 5 years earlier. The 2015 scheme would be reduced by 11 to 13 years, and you can't rejoin the 2015 scheme if you take your 95 scheme. So that's up to date as I can be. Let's have a look at what you can do now. So as Kath began to say there, because it is so expensive to try and plan for retirement, if you need any help tracing your lost pensions and the government tracing service can't help you, phone us and we'll help you. State pension, as Kath and I mentioned earlier, get a state pension forecast. In the chat box, I think I did that to everyone rather than just Jane. Any queries, phone Jane Bishell. But basically, for a state pension forecast, you can either go online and get a government gateway account, or you can phone 0800 731 0175. That's the Future Pension Centre, and you give your name, date of birth, address, and national insurance number, and ask them to send you a forecast. Building on what I briefly responded to Nicola Miller earlier, please nominate your death beneficiaries, particularly if you don't have a spouse or someone who you share your finances with. Please do nominate your death benefits, and that's the lump sum we're talking about. If you want to try and get a greater handle on what sort of pension you're building up, use our pension calculator to see what you're on track to get based on your current pension plans. And if you want to sort of try and budget for what am I spending now and what might my budget in retirement be, then use our budget planner. It's on our website and it helps you keep track of your spending now and plan what you need for retirement. And if you need any help at all from us, Kath and I obviously have gone through as much as we can today in the short time we have, but our helpline is available Monday to Friday 9 to 5. 0800 011 3797. If you just want a chat about pensions, if you just want us to be a sounding board, call us. If you've got technical queries that are really difficult, call us and we'll try and help you. Next slide, please. And that just confirms, Kath mentioned earlier, we don't just do pensions, we also have other people in the team who can help you with anything to do with money. So if in order to stay paying into your pension, you could find a way of reducing the cost of your loans, perhaps saving on your insurances or your travel insurance, or looking to help you budget more, there's a money guidance phone number at the bottom, 0800 138 7777. Our number for anything to do with pensions, 0800 011 3797. And for those of you already over 50 in the USS Investment Builder or NEST pension, you have those 6 options I went through earlier. And there's a really super free hour-long appointment to help you understand and discuss which of those 6 options might suit you, called PensionWise. And the middle phone number there enables you to book an appointment, or you can do it online using that link there. So loads of ways we can help you. And finishing off sort of the formal part of the presentation, the next slide just tells you, as well as pensions, all of the things we could possibly help you with, and just really to say thank you very much and to see whether or not there's any questions. I haven't got